let's have a look at validation, explain what it is, and look at some of the simple validation techniques that we can use to ensure that the data in our ICT solution is valid. Alright, so validation, by definition, is a process which ensures that data accepted for processing by our ICT solution is sensible and reasonable. So it's something that we can use to check the data being entered into our system to make sure that it is sensible and reasonable. It's obviously very important that we consider validation techniques whenever we're designing our ICT solution. Okay, the more validation techniques that we have in place, the less likely that we're going to have bad data enter our ICT system, and obviously the less bad data we have, the more accurate the solution will be. So it is a good idea to have as many validation checks as you possibly can. We can use things like drop down menus or validation rules to help us. There's also another range of validation techniques that we can use to restrict the user as to the actual data that they can enter. So the first one we're going to look at is data type checks. So let's imagine now we've got a simple database. It's got two fields. One is name and one is age. Whenever we're setting up that database in Access or whatever program we use to create the database, we will obviously have to define the fields to say what sort of data type is held within each field. So whenever we're saying name, we would obviously define the name field as text data type, or we would ensure that the name field is set to the data type text, so text can be entered into that field, and we would obviously make sure that age is set as a number. Okay, so the only data type that we would accept in this field would be numbers. So let's take a good example. So in an ideal world, we'd have Jim would come along and he would put in his name and he would put in his age, 17. Both would be fine. Okay, Jim is perfectly valid, it's text, and the age 17 is again perfectly valid, it's been entered in number form. Where we might get a problem is if we have someone come along, for example like Sam, who enters his name. Again, there's no problem with the name's fine, no issue there. But let's say for whatever reason Sam decides to type his age in like this, not in number form but actually spelling it in text. We obviously don't want this in our database. We want everyone to enter their data in the same way so we can analyze it and so we can do things with it. So what we have something which this angry man represents that checks the data being entered into our ICT solution or into our database in this case, and it makes sure that the data being entered is valid. Obviously this is not valid, so we want to reject that. Okay, and we might give a message out to the user to say sorry, but only numbers can be entered in this field, which would hopefully lead Sam to realize, okay, I can't just type it in like this. I'm going to have to delete that and I'm going to have to put it in number format. So again, hopefully Sam would go and he'd type it up, he would enter it as an actual number, then he would put it back into the database and it would be accepted. Okay, so that's a data type check. Let's check the type of data being entered. If there's a mistake, it will notify the user, and hopefully the user will then realize the mistake that they've made and be able to enter correctly. But if they can't work out the mistake that they've made, it just will not allow them to enter that data into the database, because it's one of the validation checks that we've used. The next thing that we might have in our database, we might have something called a presence check. So let's imagine Sue comes along, okay, and she enters in her name. Again, there's no issue there, okay, perfectly valid, that's okay. What might happen then is Sue might forget to enter her age. She mightn't see the part of the form when we do that, or she might make a mistake and press enter by mistake or click on a button. We obviously don't want this blank piece of data in our database. So again, what's going to happen is the validation check that we're going to use is going to say no, sorry, you have to enter your age if you want your data to be processed and accepted into our ICT system. Generally, this type of check, which is called a presence check, is represented on forms by a red asterisk, which looks something like this. Yeah, or a red star type thing. It's called an asterisk, and they will put this beside the actual question on the form to let you know that it's required. So whenever you sign up for things like Facebook or websites, it will more often than not ask you for your email address, your name, and a password. Those types of things will generally be required fields. It won't accept your data and process it unless you have entered the required fields. Now sometimes there are certain fields which aren't required. You could fill them in if you want. You don't necessarily have to. But with a required field, if it's not filled in, the validation check will reject the data. It will say no, sorry, but in order to be accepted into my database or spreadsheet or whatever it is we've designed, you will have to fill in the required field, which would hopefully then lead Sue to go and to enter the data in for that actual field. So let's imagine she's 28, and again that's going to go and that's going to sit on our database. Perfect, we're going to have nice valid data. Okay, we don't have anything that's been left out, we don't have anything that's been entered incorrectly, we don't have any invalid data types, nothing that's going to affect the quality of the data held in our database at this minute, which is what validation does. Remember, it ensures that the data entered and the data processed is valid. Another thing that we can use is we can use just delete this out of the way. We can use a validation rule. Now you've used these before. You'll remember using them in your own sample assignment, and it's just something that we can use to say, let's say for example, in this database that we've got here, we might decide that we might use a validation rule on age. And we might decide that the oldest person that we're going to allow to enter data into our database is 120. Let's say the oldest person in the world at this time is 120 years old. So we know that we're not going to have anyone who is much older than that, or actually we're not going to have anyone at all who's older than that. So we might use a validation rule. So we might say on the age field, we might say in the validation rule section, whenever we're setting up the actual database table, we might set it as, for the age one, the validation rule to be between 0 and 125. Okay, that means that if anyone enters an age like this, so let's say we've got Joe for another nice short one. Joe comes along again, enters his data, puts in the database, perfectly valid, no problem there, but for whatever reason he enters his age as 762. Obviously we know that that's not going to be correct. That's not a valid piece of data, because human beings don't live to be 762. So we can again use a validation technique, which is going to reject the bad data out of our system, and it's going to tell us that we've made a mistake. So we might set up a message to appear whenever incorrect data is entered, something to say like, sorry, but you seem to have entered an incorrect value, can you double check it and enter it again. The range of, or the acceptable range in this field is between 0 and 125. Okay, so again Joe might then realise that, oh, I pressed 6 and 7 at the same time and I put my age in as 762, and then he would hopefully realise he's made a mistake and he would put it in as 62. Again, perfectly valid piece of data now, and it's within the range that we have used. Okay, so that's called a range check. And again, that's something we can use to make sure that the data being entered is within a sensible range, and it's going to help us to ensure that only accurate data gets into our database by rejecting out any data that doesn't look or doesn't fit or doesn't seem like it's accurate. There's some things we can use, some techniques we can use to improve the accuracy of the database. Okay, so let's think of a mobile phone number. So now 072 149 753 82. So that should give us 11 digits, hopefully. You see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yep, so same idea. Let's imagine we've got a database and we are trying to collect the mobile phone numbers for our customers. So what we might have within the database is a length check on this particular field. On the mobile phone number field, we might have a length check to make sure that every piece of data entered into this is exactly 11 digits long. What that will do is if someone comes along with a completely ridiculous mobile phone number like this one, it's going to say, sorry, but this field requires 11 digits, so it will let us know we've made a mistake. And again, if we put in too many, the same thing will happen. It will make it very clear to us that we have actually haven't input the correct number of digits for that piece of information or for that piece of data.